Rahway native Frank Thorn is a comic book artist and writer who has had a long and storied career. Born in Union County, June 16, 1930, this wizard of fantasy began his career penciling several romance stories for Standard Comics at 18 years old. Thorn worked on a multitude of comics after graduation through the 50s and 60s. Included among his projects, he drew the Perry Mason newspaper strip for King Features and turned out stories for Dell Comics. At Dell, Flash Gordon, Jungle Jim, Tomahawk, Mighty Samson, Enemy Ace, and the Green Hornet were all comics he drew or penned for. Thorn was honored with a National Cartoonist Award in 1963. Later, Frank released his graphic novel adaptation of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and in 1970 wrote and drew Our Subject, the illustrated history of Union County, for the Elizabeth Daily Journal. That long-running paper met its end in the late 90s. By all accounts, his work was rather thorough, with over 100 pages dedicated to maintaining the history of the oldest English settlement in New Jersey. It has been 50 years since its release, and the Truth About Colonial Linden team has added minor updates after his pages. This as new information has come to light, or in cases of our altered interpretations. That said, a scant few of these are any more than additional historical info we wish to include. A fine work by this Jersey legend. Frank Thorn's comic book breakthrough was in 1975 when he was asked to draw Red Sonja for Marvel Comics. The goddess eroticism of this project would set his path for the next 4 decades. Red Sonja led him to create the highly erotic woman warrior Gita of Alazar in 1978. Also in that year, Thorn won the San Diego Ink Pot Award given by Playboy for Moonshine McJugs, and he also won Warren Magazine's Best Comic for Gita of Alazar and a New Jersey Art Directors Club Award. Frank's style of erotic fantasy and superb artistry led to the Iron Devil and Devil's Angel in the 90s, and has kept elevating the Rahway native. Now known as the Dirty Old Man of Comics, Thorn yearly judges Red Sonja lookalikes. The Truth About Colonial Linden Project, an area historical group aided by Minutemen Media, will present icon Frank Thorn's entire 1970 series, The Illustrated History of Union County, published in the Elizabeth Daily Journal in an educational frame. This comic, colorized by contributors J. Phillips and Phil Szabo, will be available page to page, week to week, as it was in 1970. Here in this video series, we are reading the work, presenting our colorization, providing insights with Phil Szabo's animations of Frank Thorn's original comic strip to provide an extensive yet palatable compilation of the history of Union County. A history which includes the artistic achievement of Rahway-born, Scotch Plains resident, and local icon Frank Thorn. We end the prelude and begin the series with page 1 of Frank Thorn's The Illustrated History of Union County, published in the Elizabeth Daily Journal in 1970. To begin the story of this county, we turn the clock back 65 million years. At this time, Union County was at the bottom of a vast ocean infested with swarms of strange sea creatures. The seas gradually receded, cataclysmic upheavals formed the Watchung mountain range. Soon the land became a primeval jungle. As recently as 100,000 BC, the Great Glacier covered Union County, often 3 miles high. During an early period of life, there is evidence that dinosaurs roamed the jungles of Union County. Giant mammoths, mastodons, and the ferocious peccazies were also found in this area at the time. Through countless ages, Union County knew only these aboriginal inhabitants. Then, millions of years after the monsters had vanished, a tiny white sail appeared on the horizon, and a new era began. The Illustrated History of Union County by Frank Thorn, originally released by the Elizabeth Daily Journal in 1970. In this colorized version, we will adjust the dates to reflect the year 2020. The year is 1609. 411 years ago, on the 6th of September, the ship Half Moon, with a crew of 20 from the Old World, sighted land. Henry Hudson, the captain of this vessel, was commissioned by the East India Company of the United Provinces to find a route to China, but instead he sailed in Sandy Hook Bay and cast anchor. The next day, the natives visited the boat. They were glad to see the white men. Hudson traded with them and learned of their habits and ways of life. Meanwhile, some of the crew were exploring the land. Note, Union County was actually formed in 1857, but for clearer understanding, we will refer to the area as it is known to us today. The morning after the Half Moon arrived in Sandy Hook Bay, Henry Hudson sent John Coleman and 4 crewmen to explore the harbor. They sailed up the Arthur Kill to Elizabethport. September 1609, the first white men set foot in Union County. This was at Elizabethport. They made contact with the native Indians and learned that the area, New Jersey, was called Swayachby. They took note of the beautiful countryside and departed. John Coleman, speaking to the Indians in picture, was slain by the treacherous arrow of a native as they left the shore, killed because he had not brought gifts to the savages. (1643). Before the settlement of Union County, this area was sparsely inhabited by the Lenni Lenape Indians. They were a small tribe numbering about 2,500 in all of New Jersey. They lived along river valleys, occupying a camp about 10 years, then moving on to another site. The Dutch that settled Staten Island found them very hospitable. In the year 1643, the Dutch massacred 80 of the unsuspecting natives at Jersey City. The Red Men in turn attacked the Dutch settlement at Hoboken and nearby Staten Island. In later years, there were uprisings in Sussex County to the north. This was the extent of Indian massacres in New Jersey. Fortunately, there was always peace and friendship between the Indians and the settlers of Union County. Before the first English settlement in New Jersey was established, the Dutch had located plantations in Hudson County. This land was controlled by wealthy Dutch patroons. A group of English planters from Long Island tried to obtain a grant in New Jersey from the Dutch at New Amsterdam in the year 1633. But the Dutch demands were too high, and no agreement could be made. 1664. During the Dutch settlement of the New York area, the English poured into the New England section. Conflicts over boundaries led to the English capture of all Dutch-controlled land. Under the New English rule, the Long Island planters obtained a grant from Governor Nichols of New York. On Staten Island, the purchase was made from the Sagamore chief Matano for articles valued at £365. The date was October 28, 1664. White area on the map of Jersey shows the purchase. 400 square miles north from Newark to Amboy in the south, from the Arthur Kill into the Watchung Mountains. The path that led to the Elizabethtown Tract, now Union County, and eventually the colonization of all of New Jersey occurred with the English taking New Amsterdam from the Dutch in 1664. This was presented in Thorn's work, but the details and some information of note, the truth about colonial Linden, will share briefly. Stay tuned after this history extra for page 6 of Frank Thorn's Illustrated History of Union County. In 1664, although the two nations were at peace, King Charles II of England bequeathed New Amsterdam and the surrounding lands to his brother, the Duke of York. One problem: the English king did not own, ever hold, nor have any legitimate claim to the Dutch colony. Well, at least not yet. A few months later, 4 British warships and an army of several hundred men came over the horizon and descended towards the lower tip of the island. Upon reaching Manhattan's shores, British demanded the small port city of but 9,000 inhabitants to surrender. Stuyvesant, the larger-than-life authority in New Amsterdam, prepared for defense, but with little support, as most citizens, along with the prominent members of society, urged the surrender. English ships took the city without firing a shot. Within a year, those same Puritan families Stuyvesant denied 30 years prior were given grants to establish a settlement which would become the Greater New Jersey, on land that will eventually become Union County. However, that wasn't the last they saw of the Dutch. In 1673, during the Third Anglo-Dutch War, the Netherlands would retake Manhattan with 600 men, within weeks acquiring the upstart Elizabethtown tract. They would hold the area for less than a year, the British regaining New York and New Jersey again without a shot, as provided by the Treaty of Westminster in 1674. The Netherlands chose to retain Suriname in South America, which they thought would become more profitable. And they were wrong. (1664) At Elizabethport, 356 years ago, the first settlers arrived. There were approximately 60 families in the first group, migrating from Long Island and Connecticut. All Union County was a vast wilderness, a primeval kingdom of nature. They found the river the only practical way to penetrate the forest. Thus, the pioneers explored the interior of this section. This aerial view of Elizabeth in 1664 shows the first English colony in Union County and New Jersey. The site was the old Indian village at the mouth of the Elizabeth River. Their first problems were food and refuge, so they constructed simple shelters similar to the Indian hutch and planted grain. The annoying mosquitoes and undesirable lowlands forced the settlement upstream. (1664) The tiny band of pioneers dug in along the Elizabeth River. The standard of living was crude and extremely elementary, but they fought the cold and the dampness bravely in these first few months. In such an isolated frontier, the settlers' existence was much like the native Indian. For food and part of their clothing, they relied on the forest and stream. Hunting the fields around the river provided meat for their simple diet. Fortunately, the demands of this primitive life were few and easily supplied. Each family would clear a small plot of land. They planted a various assortment of vegetables in addition to Indian corn. This was the menu of the first meals eaten by the white men in Union County. Soon more timber was cut down, more space for crops was provided as agriculture became the first industry. (1665) The new settlement got underway. The ground about the creek had been cleared, and regular group meetings of the pioneers solved many problems of the individual. The animals became doubly alert to elude the new white hunters. Progress was made in the first year. The Indian hutch was replaced by crude log cabins. Soon larger buildings outmoded the log huts. Early in August 1665, 1 year after the first 60 families arrived, there was much excitement at Elizabeth Point. It was the landing of Philip Carteret, the new governor of New Jersey. He made his residence here. Carteret named the new settlement Elizabethtown in honor of Elizabeth, wife of Sir George Carteret, who was the proprietary lord of New Jersey and a cousin of Philip. The new governor designated Elizabethtown as the first capital of the state. This town was the first and most important colony in Union County. As time went on, its boundaries embraced nearly all of Union County as we know it today. Boxwood Hall, located on East Jersey Street in Elizabeth today, was built as the first governor's mansion for Philip Carteret in 1665. It's one of a handful of surviving mansions built during the colonial era that still exist in Union County today. New Jersey's nickname is the Garden State. Many falsely believe that's because of the farmlands between the two great cities of Philadelphia and New York. However, it got its nickname because of the lavish gardens that dotted East Jersey Street from the late colonial period all the way through the early Republic up to the Civil War. Southern plantation owners would send their families to New Jersey during the summertime to escape the oppressive heat in the South. These vacationers and their wealth contributed significantly to the amount of gardens, the sophistication of those gardens, that sprawled across the middle of Elizabethtown. And Elizabethtown's gardens were considered quite the marvel of the period.
Starlight, I come up around here every day.
1665. The settlement grew rapidly. New, sturdy log homes were built and farmhouses constructed. The problem of furniture and other domestic articles arose. Having practically no source of supply, these articles had to be handmade from the resources of nature. Their plates and other small receptacles were fashioned from flat stones and hollowed-out gourds. Large containers were fashioned from hollowed tree stumps. A welcome sight on a chilly day was the roaring fire in the vast fireplace of the cabin. It gave off much heat, though most of it escaped up the large chimney. It is well to brush back the veil of time and glimpse their comparatively simple, happy lives. (1680). 1665, Elizabethtown was made the seat of the government for New Jersey, and Philip Carteret, the new governor, made his home here. In the next 7 years, bitterness grew between him and the people. His corruption mounted. He levied taxes on the boil, and soon began to make gifts of land to his personal friends. A small group of settlers met and decided to act. They raided the homes of the favored friends of Carteret. Carteret tried to prosecute the pioneers, but he was powerless. He then fled to England and remained in exile for 2 years. He returned to meet a fitting end to his career, as we will see in the next issue. During Carteret's reign, a whaling company was organized in Elizabethtown. At this time, whales were in great abundance all along the Jersey coast. The company flourished, taking the monsters from the waters off Barnegat Bay to lower New York Bay. Fishing was also profitable for early residents of this town. (1685). In New York, Philip Carteret was placed on trial for exceeding his power as governor of New Jersey. After a long court battle, Carteret was acquitted and stripped of his authority as governor. He returned to Elizabethtown a weak and different man. Fortunately, Andros's planned conquest of the area failed. The people rejected his rule. Carteret died in 1682, presumably from injuries he received from Andros's henchmen. Carteret's reign, 17 years, was typical of many early administrations where the ruler went against every principle of the people. Robert Berkeley, a Quaker, was appointed governor of New Jersey. Quaker rule attracted many of that sect to the Rahway River section, later moving on to Plainfield. The map shows the first settlement of Elizabeth, of which the Westfield, Linden, Roselle, Hillside areas were part. Dark shading indicates a peel-mate degree of settlement in each region. (1685). Their immediate needs supplied, the people of Union County took the next step in industry. Dams were built and tiny mills made of log housed simple machinery for sawing wood and grinding grain. The thick forests in the back of villages became the home of flocks of swine. Horses also ran wild and were common property. Sheep, however, were not allowed to run, for in the darkness of the forest, among other dangers, there were packs of hungry wolves. People poured into Union County in ever-increasing numbers. Farmers, coopers, carpenters, shipbuilders, supplying the vital need for craftsmen. Ships of 30 and 40 tons came up the Elizabeth River to Broad Street to take shipments of cattle, sheep, and swine to New York, and a public market was opened. 1685's Quakers that first settled the Rahway moved onto Plainfield, but John Marsh from the area of Tremley Point had already established an enduring community at Rahway, or known then as the Rahway, in 1681 by constructing one of the area's first permanent mills. The community attracted families from Woodbridge and Elizabethtown who would plot larger plantations on both sides of the river. These farms would link the small village of Springtown to an emerging port on the river, creating a blueprint of the official settlement, spreading about 1.5 miles, bolstered by the Quakers whom arrived in the post-Sir Carteret period. Rahway Village would include the first mint to literally coin the Latin phrase e pluribus unum, out of many, one. The Rahway, known as Springtown, would be the site of several engagements during the Revolution, welcomed George Washington during his inaugural trip, and was assigned one of the 6 post offices in New Jersey, located near the village in 1791. Rahway, as a fully autonomous municipality, would begin as a township in 1803. (1700). One of the most important structures in colonial Union County was the inn or tavern. It was the social and political center of many settlements. People would stop at the inn to get the latest news. Lodgings were available for weary travelers, but the innkeeper kept a critical eye on all strangers, alert to detect runaway slaves. Meetings of all kinds were held in these historic structures, and soon every new settlement had at least one. A penalty for drunkenness was enforced in Elizabethtown. The offender was fined 5 shillings, approximately $1.25, to be placed in the poor fund. If he did not pay, he was promptly placed in the stocks. (1708). In the year 1708, there came to Elizabethtown a young preacher. His name was Reverend Jonathan Dickinson. Reverend Jonathan Dickinson was pastor of the First Presbyterian Church in Elizabethtown for nearly 40 years. In these years, he achieved prominence for his work in the service of God and the education of man. He was one of the greatest men of this age. In the year 1746, at the climax of his career, Dickinson formed the first college of New Jersey. He became the first president of this college, formed to teach the ministry. The first term of the College of New Jersey opened in May 1747 and at the Dickinson home. It stood on Pearl Street between Washington Avenue and Race Street. Reverend Dickinson died 4 months later, never to know the growth of his idea. The growing classes moved into the old academy near First Church. Aaron Burr, famous statesman and vice president, attended this college here. The College of New Jersey is now known as Princeton University.
Just not long before, open your plate, and down in the shore.
1717. The four main settlements had been established before 1700. In 1717, the Bryant family moved west to settle in Springfield. The man of the hour was the sturdy dad, near who with his family ventured deep into the wilderness of Union County to settle. The Sayers reached Summit in 1720. Turkey, now New Providence, was settled in 1736. 1750. Here are some forgotten names of towns in Union County. Elizabethtown is now the city of Elizabeth. Connecticut Farms is now Union. Turkey Hill or Canoe Brook is now Summit. Turkey is New Providence. Wheatsheaf is Linden. Cranesville is Cranford. Bridgetown and Spanktown make up Rahway. London Plains or Milltown makes up Plainfield. The Scotch Plains is Scotch Plains. (1750). Great herds of cattle were common about Union County, and there was an increasing demand for leather, so the tanning industry was developed. Tanneries began full-scale production. Leather was added to the exports of Union County. Plans for paper mills were made in the early 1700s. Big manufacturers became interested in Union County. Elizabethtown became the cultural center of New Jersey. The great development of Union County in the early 1700s is shown by the number of mills that were built. Almost every village had one or more. Springfield was one of the most important settlements, having 10 mills. It had paper mills, grist mills, saw mills, flour mills, fulling mills, and a tobacco factory. (1750). The Indian dugout was the first method of transportation, but in the 1700s, dirt highways were developed and horses and ox carts were used to get from one place to another. In the early 1700s, an exciting new vehicle appeared in Union County, the stagecoach. Elizabethtown became an important stop in the network of stage routes between New York and Philadelphia. This map of Union County shows the first and oldest road in New Jersey. This road, St. George's Avenue, was opened by the Dutch before the English settlement in 1664 to keep up the trade between New Amsterdam and their colonies on the Delaware. The old Raritan Road was developed well before 1700.